Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. This is Season 3, Episode 18 of the podcast, and today's guest is Rob Lally. Rob helps B2B consultants and service providers get more leads through LinkedIn. We sat down and had a chat about Rob's business and how best to use LinkedIn to improve your profile, build your brand, and ultimately bring in more business. I hope you enjoyed the podcast.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
So you have a thriving ELT business and are looking to understand how to scale. Maybe you're just starting out on your entrepreneurial journey and you need to get absolute clarity in what you do and how it helps others so that you can live the life you want. Regardless of where you are on your entrepreneurial journey, you will need support, accountability, and encouragement along the way. So imagine if you could join a mastermind that would give you such support, encouragement, focus, and business knowledge from experts on branding, mindset, and marketing, and so much more. And all for less than $50 per month. Why not book a call with me today so you can start taking actions on your goals? Free month on us. No strings attached. Go to the show notes. Okay, welcome back everybody. I'm doing a series of podcasts this evening and I'm delighted to have our guest, Rob Lally. And Rob helps B2B and B2C, is it? B2B businesses with marketing on LinkedIn.
That's right. Good morning, Philip. I'm very, very excited to be here.
Great. And where are you today, Rob?
I'm based in the UK, and I tell you what, we have the first sunny day in about a year here. So after this call, I'm going to be heading straight outside and getting some sunshine because it might only last for a day. I don't know if how often you've been to England and that.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, I've been to England many times. Yeah. Well, I'm from Ireland. It's worse. It's like half a day a year.
Yeah.
So yeah, you get an afternoon and that's it. And then that's over. Summer, it's straight into winter. But tell me, it's also Jubilee weekend, isn't it? So you have a few days.
Yeah, that's right. I think everyone's kind of taking it easy, but for us in business, we have a tendency to sort of work around the clock and take time off when we can, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we don't work regular hours. We're not regular people. So, Rob, I came across you on LinkedIn, and then I saw that you work on LinkedIn, and we have I interviewed Herbert Gerzer a few months back, and then of course when I connect with Herbert, it connects to you, and you comment on his stuff, and that's how LinkedIn works. So tell me a little bit about your background and how you started out. And
yeah, so I was very lucky at the start of my career in some ways because I started actually when I turned 18. I started as a bartender, and I was like part-time job there. And when I went to uni, they really liked me. So after uni, they like got me back and they sort of fast-tracked me up to management, which allowed me to basically be an operator and a promoter as well. So I think like a lot of people who run the businesses, they are just the promoters. But if you can be an operator as well, like you can sort of see a little bit of like almost like the chessboard. So I was working in like bars and restaurants, and I moved my way up the ladder, and I started to, the further you get up the ladder in places, the more that you sort of have like the pressure from like the executives who are constantly wanting to, drive the business forward with like 2 to 3% growth in a year, right? And what kind of interested me on entrepreneurship, it's quite funny actually, because I one of my managers was on like leave for a while, so I was effectively running like this bar and restaurant business, and like my bosses were just all the time like, oh, we need to grow it, we need to grow it, we need to grow it. And I remember taking like a step back. I'd seen like a little bit of courses online. I'd seen like a little bit of entrepreneurship, and I was thinking to myself, these guys want, a 2 to 3% growth a year. But what happened? Like, why just 2 to 3%? Like, why can't we grow the business like even more than that? And I was sort of, so young and naive at the time that I didn't realize that it's actually very, very hard to grow like a well-established business that's already doing $1 million a year by more than sort of 2 to 3%. But I didn't know that. And I think like sometimes, like if you're a bit naive, it actually works in your favor because you try things which you might not necessarily try, right? So during like that year, I basically like completely worked my ass off and networked and like really turned the building from essentially like a place which does very low ticket orders, beers, lagers, low ticket meal items. And I essentially went around to different businesses and basically like started holding like massive staff parties for different businesses and had that as almost like the hub for the city where I was. And then swapped out like a lot of the different orders for like higher ticket items. And basically, because I did that, we actually managed to grow the business by 25% in a single year, which was giant, right? But what got me into entrepreneurship is that I was like so pleased with myself. People around me were so pleased, but I actually ended up getting like a little pat on the back, and I got £100 bonus for the entire year. So it's just, so like in corporate environments, like it's hard, and I was just like, I feel like I'm a bit wasted here,
Yeah, and it's also I don't know much about the pub business apart from being a patron, of course, but there are, if you want to increase, if you want to increase business by a certain percentage, other than running corporate events, that's all fine and functions, but you can't really supersize people's drinks, can you? There's ethical concerns. No. Yeah, you like, are you sure you're only having one more pint? You might have two more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe they were thinking around that area, were they, that people could maybe buy more food or more drink or bring more members of the family, but you were thinking more about functions and adding value and.
That's it, really. And I think, and I'm guilty of this all the time. And I think sometimes in business, we all get lost in the weeds. And when we get lost in the weeds, we can't see anything in front of us. We can't like work out the right path we're going to take. And because I was, like I say, I was naive back then. I didn't really know too much about business. And I just thought, what happens if we can increase in this building? It's already doing $1 million a year. What happens if we can move the tables closer together, double the amount of tables in the place, fill it with parties? And what do parties spend money on? They don't spend money on cheap drinks. They spend money on the more higher value items, the champagne. If we can stock up on these higher value items, increase the volume, increase the average order value as well, and make it, make sure that each bartenders trained on actually making sure people have a good time. We've both been to pubs and we've both been served by those types of people who absolutely don't want a conversation with you, right? Absolutely, they're just not interested. They just want to get home. Then you've also been to pubs where the person really makes you feel at home. They're asking how your days went. If we could do that and have like create an experience out of something, and it worked. It worked. So yeah, there's that.
Yeah, and I've known actually one more entrepreneur that I worked with. I can mention his name, Vinny Quinn from Nixers.ie and Jobs.ie in Ireland. I worked with Vinny, actually. He was my boss, and he started out with Diageo and drinks promotions. And I think a lot of people, it's a good training for an entrepreneur.
The reason why is because mainly it teaches you how people work, right? It teaches you like almost the psychology of people, what keeps people coming back for more, how to speak to people, how to interact with people. I I considered myself like an introvert before I ever got into that sort of trade. But afterwards, I was like, oh, it's just because I wasn't around enough people. I didn't know, I wasn't given the opportunity to build up relationships. And I wasn't given the opportunity to actually move the pieces, like I say, on the chessboard to see if I can, actually have an impact on something.
Yes. And then, of course, what happened was the whole corporate reality dawned, didn't it? It was like, well, you increased by, oh, wow, that was really well done, Rob. So here's your 100 pounds and, don't spend it all in the one shop.
It was funny because not only did I get that for like the entire year, so bearing in mind, I increased the business by 250 grand, which has never ever been done before in like a single year. And we hit like records and everything. And I didn't quite know what a big thing that was. I was happy with it, but I didn't quite know what a big thing that was. And so they kind of gave me, a bonus at the end of the year for like £100. And I remember speaking to like my direct boss at the time, and he was just like, welcome to the real world. I was like, well, here we go. This is maybe if I could do something like this for myself, then I could be in charge. I can have the freedom, right?
Exactly. Not make money for somebody else, and not get rewards for it. So you said,
Exactly.
well, this for a game of soldiers, and you want to go out on your own. What happened next?
In like a few different job roles after that, and wherever I kind of worked, I seemed to know the interview process quite well. It's probably because I was used to hiring. So when I eventually started moving into business, I was like, how about because the amount of like resumes and things we got through the door, wherever I worked, and I would notice that hiring managers would look at a resume for 2 to 3 seconds before they were like, nah, or I could see, particularly when I was in the restaurant trade, I could see that, a person would come in, they'd be really friendly, but like they would somehow put off the interviewers straight away. So I was like, maybe I could teach people how to actually, go about getting interviews, go about having good resumes and getting them sort of through the door. So that's kind of where I first went with my business. I went around setting up, almost like a career coaching type business. And, I think like you kind of sold this dream on business that like, you decide you're going to do it, you register your business, and then suddenly, the clients come pouring in. So quickly I found that when I was trying to get some traction for helping people with like resumes and things like this, I found that I basically did not know anything about sales or marketing. I was like, I really don't know what to do, which sent me on this whole path of basically learning how to generate leads, how to really sort of immerse myself in sales and marketing, hiring coaches, getting courses, books, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about the CV resume business. Somebody said, I think it was when I worked in Jobs.ie many moons ago, and it makes sense, not just there, but other stuff I've read online and in books as well, is that, a lot of people start out and they think, oh, actually, if I had a career coaching business and I did up people's CVs, then this would be good. Nobody else is doing that. And said, well, the reason why is because these people have no jobs and they have no money. Is that true? Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, like it is true. So like it was actually very hard to find like the correct target market when I got there, because I pretty much thought like that. Well, there's people who need jobs out there, right? But then you quickly realize that the people who actually are really desperate for jobs, who are like have the urgency for your service, they don't have the ability to pay, right? And then you're like, well, how can I position this? And then I was on LinkedIn as well, and I started to realize that this industry is a red, saturated ocean. Like every person I'm speaking to has been hit up by recruiters who will work for nothing to get them a job. And they've been hit up 20, 30 times. So it was a very tough industry. But I think sometimes like the deeper the ocean that you're in, the sharper your sword gets. Do you know what I mean?
So that was the thing. So you decided to move on from there. So you upskilled, and you spent some time getting your knowledge set together.
Yeah, so bit of a journey. So I basically read every sort of sales marketing book I could possibly read. I took myself through all sorts of courses. I got myself a coach, an accountability coach, and eventually I was kind of hitting a stage where I was booking sort of 20 to 30 to 40 calls a month with LinkedIn. And this was with this niche. And I was like, what happens if there's other people out there who were once like me, who didn't know anything about it, and I could actually help fast track them up the ladder a little bit and be their coach. So then I I packaged the service, everything I learned, and then I took it as almost like a lead generation service for other coaches to help them as well, other small business owners. And it's evolved a little bit over time, but that's kind of how the bridge happened.
Okay, so using LinkedIn is easy. You just make a connection and then say, would you like to hop on a call, 10-minute call? I've helped other people out. Bingo, there's your business.
Well, so you would think, right? So you would think. But so it's funny, right? Because it's evolved drastically over time. In 2017, you could happily send a bunch of connections requests each day saying, hey, this is what I do. Can I help you with it? But over time, the market's reached, it's reached saturation, to be fair. And that the principles don't work like that anymore. Do you know what I mean? And doing that approach now, I always liken like generating leads. You're gonna laugh at this, but I always liken generating leads to like dating, right? So if you like walk up to a person in a bar that you find attractive and you're like, hey, do you want to be my girlfriend, right? It's effectively what you're asking people to do if you do that type of strategy on LinkedIn. And even if they do want a partner, they're still going to say no to you, right? So there's all sorts of kind of like parallels with it like that. And a big thing on LinkedIn is actually trying to build up a little bit of a relationship first, just so you don't feel, so the person doesn't feel used, basically, right?
Exactly. It reminds me, I think it was Rob Voss. You may have read this book, as you've read a lot. I'm sure we've read some of the same books, but by Voss. I think he was was he an FBI negotiator? His name is Voss. But anyway, in the book, he's talking about, building rapport with a target, somebody they want to work with them. What's the word? Like an asset, isn't that right? That's the right word. And they build. So one of the techniques they use is, it's just frequency. They go to the same cafe, they go to the same place, they go to the same clubs, and and eventually, like, you talk to the person. You're like, okay, I'm here. We go to the same cafe in the afternoon. You say, oh yeah, nice weather today, and that's it. You leave it, and then gradually over time. So is LinkedIn a little bit like that?
I think that's a really good description of it, to be honest with you, because if you think about it, right, these people aren't going to go anywhere. So you have the opportunity to make repeated impressions on them. And you can do this in a bunch of different ways. So my industry, it's probably one of the toughest industries to do this because so many people do what I did. So before before all the events of the last few years, there was 1,000 people worldwide doing what I did. And this was in like early 2020. And then in 2021, I looked at, a rough sales navigator, LinkedIn sales navigator search, and there's 100,000 people doing what I did. So literally like the supply in the market is 100 times. So it's actually, I have to get all sorts of like creative now to kind of get leads. But if you're not in such a competitive industry like that, what you just said, can work very, very well. Just making repeated touches on people, making, an impression on them. And over time, they might be interested.
So it's often said, people building sales pages. And of course, there has to be a certain note struck. And, if you have a law practice, a florist, it's all different messages, isn't it? All different registers. But one thing that in copywriting, as I'm sure you've read about as well is that actually people tend to be a little bit too stuffy with their profiles. They're like, it's all kind of passive speech and longer words, professional language. Do you think, in general, I know this is a very, brushstroke thing, but that people could kind of be a little bit more accessible, a bit more personable on their profiles?
You know what? Like one of the biggest things I learned in marketing and sales, and it's actually quite disheartening when I learned it, right, is that nobody really cares about you, right? So if you're writing a company about page, if you're writing your LinkedIn profile and you're saying Philip was, a sales manager for top 10 in his company for 3 years in a row, like people don't care about it. What people do care about is themselves. If you give anyone a personality test, like they are instantly wanting to read all about themselves. So if you can design your LinkedIn profile around talking about who your target market is, what's their problem, right? What do they want to achieve, right? And people are very, very interested in reading that, right? Because it's about themselves. And then if you can sort of say, this is what I do, this is exactly what I help with, it's far more persuasive than having, a person who's just talking in sort of third person corporate speak, right?
Yeah, it reminds when I used to work for a newspaper selling advertising, and I went to a recruitment agency. I used to deal with that sector because I used to work in recruitment. And the guy left me sitting in the reception for 30 minutes. And then he came down and he started talking about himself for another 30 minutes.
Oh.
And, we probably all experience this kind of thing. So step one is don't talk about yourself, talk about other people. Yeah, and that's like easy to do.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of psychology as well. And in psychology, we have, cognitive biases as well. And I don't know if, many people have talked about it on sort of your show here, but if you can, sort of implement some cognitive biases into your LinkedIn profile, is there ever been a time where you have demonstrated authority over people? So for instance, if you've gave a meeting or, a presentation, right, can somebody take a photo of that and then have that as your background cover? So it instantly demonstrates authority. Have you worked with high value clients, 6, 7, 8-figure clients? Put that in your bio as well. Then people know this person's the real deal, right? And this is particularly important as we move into the future in online, because the markets in the online world, you've seen the graphs, right? Like people have just quit their corporate jobs and moved straight into the entrepreneur space. And as the markets get busier and busier and busier, it's great for more people are taking opportunities, but also we need to be standing out a lot more as well. We need to be really, looking like the go-to person of the place.
So like the argument from authority and the attribution bias, isn't it? It's like looking professional. It's like when they beat up the weathermen on the street, isn't it? For reporting bad weather. Or it kind of reminds me of when I used to work in a cinema. And they said, if there was a problem in the cinema, I could tell you stories, but we're not going there about fighting and drinking and the whole lot. But they say, you bring the keys and you jangle the keys. Isn't that it? Because it's almost like a Pavlovian thing. It's like you hear keys, you think like prison officer, you think like someone in authority or like school janitor or something like that, isn't it? It's very easy to do this.
You were talking about the weatherman there, and it's funny because I was one of my favorite ever books actually is Robert Cialdini's Influence, and that's where that story is talked about. And there's another good part of in that book as well where it talks about like the likability bias, like how likable are you as a person? And nobody really talks about this in the world, even though it's actually got scientific studies behind it, is that if you're likable, you have a tendency to get so many more opportunities than anyone else, than the average person who, people just don't know exist, right? So it's even evidenced in places like court cases. People who are more well liked, who are perceived as more of a likable person, will get less of a sentence for the same crime. Which, I mean, that just frigging blows my mind right there, right? So if you can be relatable in your profile as well, or just show or authenticity, right? So if you look at any of my content, I don't do like the traditional sort of content that people do. I don't do like humble brags, any of that sort of stuff. What I do is I just say what's on my mind, but people pick that up, which is very interesting because we're tuned to, we're like evolutionary tuned to these sorts of things.
And I do like your content. I follow it, and I've liked some of it, when I'm on LinkedIn. And there's another, I don't know if you follow him, Jack Frimson. He's like cold caller guru guy. You should follow him. His stuff is really funny. He just parodies the whole cold calling sales thing. It's like, make 500 phone calls before lunch and then you'll have like your $1 million or something. He takes it to these extents. But yeah, so from your experience and from clients you've worked with, so using just these simple steps, authority, being likable, and being, open to helping people. How many profiles, percentage-wise, would you say on LinkedIn are this, and how many are, look, I'm the best, and I'm like top seller and top accountant?
Not many. I need to be honest with you, and I'm not sure. I'm not really sure why. Maybe like the marketing message isn't spread out. If you go on like my YouTube channel, I try and make these things sort of free as well. Like I've got a whole guide of how you can jazz up your LinkedIn profile. But if you can even, I think particularly for people who are just starting out as well, but one of the things I recommend is always include social proof on your profile. So social proof, reviews, testimonials, right? So people know in 2022. The two questions people are asking, right, is this relevant to me? Can this person help me? And number two is this person actually a scam? Because people's defenses have actually went up because so many people are online, they're getting constantly pitched. So if you can show actual testimonials from people, and if you haven't got testimonials, right, go back through your old workplace, see if you've got any like previous manager who can just say what, a character sort of review of you. Have you got anybody who sent you a nice message that you can clip, right? Hide their name on it and post that on there as well. There's all these like ways to kind of do it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's the testimonials are so powerful, and we've talked about before in the show. I mean, you buy on Amazon, where do you go first? Is the stars, don't you?
Exactly. Right.
Four stars even looks bad now, doesn't it? I mean, it has to be 4.5, 4.75. You're like, okay, if it's the full 5, almost 90%, you see that little bit is like probably going to buy it if the price is right and you're in the market, isn't it? So
exactly.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, so you mentioned social proof, and this is something actually when I was doing a little bit of research for it, and is recommendations on LinkedIn. Because, when I first joined LinkedIn, I don't know, about 2005, 2006, and I think people I was working with, they were like saying, would you recommend me? I'll recommend you. And we were doing all this. And then I just never did it anymore because I felt it was the people who didn't even know me were recommending me. Do you remember the keywords came up and it would suggest like great worker, great presentation? This guy I've never met him before, or he doesn't know anything I've ever done. So has that feature been discontinued, and how is that working now?
Recommendations are a good thing, right? So I get what you're saying as well, but people can read if there's low quality sort of recommendations, low quality reviews. For someone like yourself, you've got like this whole giant platform of podcasts where, high sort of level entrepreneurs are being very respectful for you. That is social proof in itself. It doesn't take many people, very long to identify that. But if it was a person who maybe didn't have that platform and they've got, quite unspecific reviews, the more specific a person can get in a review, like the better it is, right? So yeah, that's what I'd say there.
Okay, and as I promised before we had the chat, I'm going to go into some advice I've read online about things not to do on LinkedIn. I mean, when you put out posts, things not to do is better than things to do, isn't it? Because people just want to rubberneck, don't they? That's kind of this, as you know, the psychology behind it. So here's sloppy LinkedIn mistakes. Okay. Number one was not having enough recommendations. So second one, being inconsistent. Can you talk to me about that one?
There's a few main sort of actions that you should be doing on there. You should be posting your content. You should be being authentic with it as well. But you should also be prospecting. You should be sending outbound messages to people to see if they want to essentially, high level overview to see if they essentially want to do your service. And I don't know why, but it's got such a bad rap over the last few years. I think it's because people have spammed it. But with this whole movement online at the moment, the quickest way, if you're starting a new business or, you're in a business, but you're not really using LinkedIn, the quickest way for you to get revenue is to message people. I don't care what anybody says, right? It's to message people, and you need to be doing it consistently because you need a pipeline of people, right? If your business is hanging on one person who you've messaged in the last week who might or might not reply to your message, right, then you should be worried about where the other people are going to come from, right? You need to be consistent about that. In terms of content, people, the more impressions you can put on someone, the more they will like and understand you. I got a YouTube channel, and I've got, hours and hours and hours and hours of content on there. Sometimes I'm just talking about things that come to my mind. Sometimes it's a bit more structured, right? And the amount of calls I've jumped on with people who, when we get together, they just chat to me as if we've been friends for a long time, because the impressions are already there. They feel like they already know me, right? And it's the same thing. As you can get yourself more in front of people, you're off to a flying start.
Okay, so you mentioned messaging people, but what sort of contact, what sort of messages you have been putting out there? How long? I mean, how do you know who to message?
Yeah, so this is a great question, because really it comes down to knowing your ideal client, right? And everyone kind of rolls their advice at this because it's very unsexy, right? Like, oh, you must do your client research. Oh, you must do your niche research. Everyone rolls their eyes at it and they think to themselves, yeah, I already know who my general customers are. But do you know how your customers think? Do you know what specific pain points your customers have? Do you know how they like to be approached? So I've always went very deep in these areas. And because of this, I have done quite well. So, for instance, I went through a stage where I targeted life coaches. So I was reaching out to life coaches, sending them a connection message, starting to, essentially see if they were interested in the service, see if they've got anything I can help them with. And what I found out was something very, very subtle, but it's so important, is that if I would say to a life coach, what's your biggest challenges in the business? What are you struggling with right now? 99% of the time, the conversation would stop there and they would never reply to me. If I would say to them, where do you want to get to? What does the future look like to you? I would get a response. And the reason why is if you actually know the niche and know, I'm just using life coaches as an example, but if you know the niche, you will know that they like to stay away from negativity. They don't focus on the negativity. They want to focus on things they can control, right? Things they want in their future. So step number one is actually working out how your audience like to be spoken to, right? Are they going to potentially be in denial about some things, right? Are they going to be avoiding some things? Are they things that they are excited to speak about? And if you can identify some of these things, it becomes a lot easier to actually approach people. If I then took those same messages I was sending to the life coaches and which I did do, I brought them over to a business audience, digital marketers, what do you want your future to look like? They were like, get this guy out of here, right? They weren't interested, because what they were interested in is how many leads have you got this week? What's the percentage of conversion, right? Different speak. So the biggest rule is learning how to communicate with your specific audience. No message can be a blanket message.
So so how do you find out that, okay, you do your customer avatar, you do the search, but there's the register, the way you address them. Is it just trial and error, or do you look at what they write and the language they use?
Well, here's what I would do is through customer research, I would actually be getting these people on the phone. And I would, because people don't like to be sold to, but they're happy to give insight into things. It's just like some weird psychology. It's just one of those things. So what I would be doing is I would be asking 20 life coaches, messaging them saying, hey, I'm thinking about starting a business in this area. Can you, I know you've been doing this a while. Would you mind if I just asked you a few questions just over a phone call, just to see if this is like a good niche for me, right? And then most people respond to yes, as long as you phrase them as an expert. And when you phrase them as an expert, and they have the phone call with you, then you can get used to like what the language is saying. If you ask them what's your typical goals, right? And they're really struggling to come up with that answer, and you see it's like a pattern, to probably stay away from that in the messenger, right? So then you get your hypothesis from doing all these calls, and then you go out and test your messages. You test your messages with these people, and then you're like, that actually confirms what I was thinking here, right? Now I know they only respond to this, right? They only trust people to jump on a call with them if I've said this beforehand. Does that make sense? Sorry, I feel like I was a bit vague there.
No, absolutely. That is fantastic insight and advice. And what I took away from that is you don't try to teach people something, which is sometimes marketing messages that you should really be thinking about this. And why are you not thinking about this? And people don't want that, do they? Because there's certain places people don't want to go.
Exactly.
It's intrusive, isn't it? And it's, people feel shame. So we will do anything to stay away from shame, won't we? Or move, and if we can move people away from shame, that's a selling tactic in itself, isn't it?
It's funny you say that, right? Because I think as well, in terms of entrepreneurship in general, anytime I have been in denial about like my skill set, or like in denial about like how bad I am at something, right? I have failed and failed and failed and failed. And I think from what I see at entrepreneurship in a moment, at the very moment, is that it's very hard for people to admit like when they're lost, when they're wrong, because they see all these influencers who are having all this success and it almost makes it even more shameful, like you were saying. I remember I went through a time, probably because I'm quite a nice, I'm a nice guy, right? So I went through a time where I basically sucked at sales. I sucked and sucked and sucked at sales. But I thought, this was a good few years ago, but I thought the reason why I couldn't make any sales was because like the clients were the wrong type of people. And I remember that call after call, like 20 in a row. And I was having to manually generate all these myself. So it's a lot of work. I just couldn't close the deal. Anyway, I had this guy come to me one day, and he was like, so interested in your service. He was like, we talked through everything. And I was telling him in the call, like the things to be aware of and everything like this. And I was like, so do you want to do this? And he was like, you know what? He was like, I'm going to take 2 weeks to think about it, but get back in touch with me in 2 weeks' time. And this was a stage where like I really I needed the money, right? I needed the revenue coming in. And I called him 2 weeks later, and I was like, so how's it going? Are you ready to sort of do this deal? And he was like, oh, well, no, actually. He was like, I've actually went and bought this other guy's course in the last 2 weeks. And basically what had happened was he'd went and bought one of my competitors' programs when I basically sucked at sales so much that I couldn't tell he was ready to buy on my call. And instead, I put it down to he really does need time to think. But he was ready to buy, right? He just needed a bit of pushing over the edge. And I remember that I felt so ashamed of myself. I went into the other room. I spoke to my girlfriend. I was like, I'm gonna have to go out on a walk. And I beat myself up on the walk so badly that I had that it got rid of all these feelings of like denial, got rid of all these feelings of like shame. I was like, I suck at this. I need to do something about this. And over the next few weeks, I, hired like a coach for sales. I read every sort of sales book I could ever imagine. I did more and more sales training. And then I had like a record month. And it's just funny because I think, feeling ashamed sometimes gets like a bad, bit of bad sort of, bit of a bad rep, but if you're like a new entrepreneur or even just an experienced entrepreneur, like the quicker you can feel like what you're actually doing bad in, what you're ashamed of, like admitting, the quicker you can kind of improve and get yourself on the right track.
I agree 100%. I think I've just started Ego is the Enemy. You might know that book with Ryan Holiday. Yeah. So he talks about very much the same thing, is you have to, you have to face reality, because we have an inflated self, or a sense of ourself, don't we? We're not too narcissistic, I hope, but we think, oh yeah, well, this is not affecting me. And then, evidence to the contrary comes in and we try to bat it away, don't we? We try to preserve this illusory self. And that's exactly what shame is. It's actually a reality check in a lot of ways. Yeah,
that's it. And I think like we live in kind of like a bit of a society now where we try and avoid these feelings. But I avoided these feelings, and honestly, like I shot myself in the foot. We have an actual cognitive bias called the denial bias, right? Psychological denial. And it's there to protect us from harm. But sometimes we can like trick ourselves into thinking we're better than we are. And if we look at evolution, I'm a big fan of like psychology. If you look at evolutionary psychology, there's a great author called great evolutionary psychologist called Robert Trivers, and he wrote The Folly of Fools. And he talks about how basically we estimate we are between 5 to 20% better than what we actually are at any given time. And the ability to get really real with yourself, if you're starting with a business, what aren't you good at, is going to do you so much better than kind of following, all the traditional advice of like growing your business, just working out what your weaknesses are.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, working in sales as I did as well, and there's a lot of like ego and pride goes into it, and competitiveness, isn't there? I know there's been like sales floors I've been on, and they ring the manager at the weekend and they say that this guy, they go behind people's backs, don't they? Because the jealousy is terrible in sales, isn't it? If Golden Boy is knocked down, then, the new white knight comes in and there's like, they hate each other, don't they? That's generally what happens. But the flip side of the big ego is the big shame as well, isn't it? They're almost like in tandem, aren't they? It's like the bigger the ego, the more you're hiding. Really, that's it. But we won't go on to my sales career because I don't think I'm ready to quite face that yet. But I just wanted to continue about another few things. But sharing too much, you talked about this a little, you touched on it a little bit earlier about humble brag, wasn't it? And but it seems to work because it gets a lot of likes and shares, doesn't it? But sharing too much information or sharing too little information, what do you think about that?
Well, I think like we're in this strange time in terms of like the online space, and particularly for LinkedIn. There's all this pressure on you because there's not just your one employer, right, looking at you now. There's 1,000 potential employers. There's 1,000 potential people who might hire you for business. So we're in this like odd space where people feel pressured to either, virtue signal, humble brag, create these, crazy like emotional stories and just pump them out and pump them out and pump them out. And I think, we've reached like this time now where authenticity has become a tactic almost, rather than actually just
vulnerability
saying what you mean.
As well, isn't it? Yes.
And like if you think about it, like vulnerability sometimes is very hard to admit, and it's not natural to just pump out 20 vulnerability posts in a row, right? But what happens is our brains are evolutionary, according to a lot of evolutionary psychology books, our brains are evolutionary wired to pick up on like manipulation and lies, because in the old times, we would be in a lot of danger if somebody tricked us, right? So what actually happens with these people is, although they might be popular, what happens after a time is the audience stop believing them. And people who are doing these kind of tactics, they don't take this into account. They just think, I'm reaping the rewards right now. But if you've got on social media and you've got your life on show all the time, eventually things, because business is long, right? Eventually things are going to come out that, maybe that wasn't true, right? If you are going to be an influencer, you're going to be in a spotlight. So in terms of like what I do, I just kind of put up stuff which I feel would be helpful to people. I'm also not afraid of having unpopular opinions on things as well. I'm not there for likes. I'm there for building a business. I'm there to, genuinely get people who and help them, right? I get like a lot of messages off the YouTube channel is kind of just more of a passion project to share things like sales advice, share things like all sorts of stuff. But I get a lot of messages from there being like, thank you, Rob, this really helped me. And I wouldn't do that if I was just I wouldn't get them messages if I was just trying to show like the best part of myself all the time, because it's just not real, right? It's just not real. We're humans.
Yeah, it's like a book I read recently about woke washing, and the guy who's talking about, Raytheon and all these weapons manufacturers, and they have like Pride Month and they have like diversity statements, but it's like, they're killing indiscriminately. Yeah, that's what they do. But people see through that, don't they? It's like, oh, here's a weapons manufacturer saying they're all right on about things. It's like it's not, it doesn't gel, does it? Yeah.
It doesn't gel. And as soon as you've broken your audience's trust, like once, like I say, business is a long game. When you've broken your audience's trust once and it turns out that maybe you're not that type of person who's putting up all these posts, like you're going to find it very hard to get any traction from them, because people remember for a long time,
Yes, exactly. As they said, as what was it, Groucho Marx said, if you authenticity, if you can fake that, you've got it made, isn't that it? So, so a photo, like profile pic, is it important? Like
it is. It's not as important as people make out though. Any sort of profile picture that I've taken has always been stood in my corridor with maybe like some direct light or like a soft light on my face. Just with a picture off a camera phone, right? There's people's, this is my humble opinion, right? But you don't need a professionally done £500 photo, because people don't care that much. People care about themselves. Okay, they only care about themselves. They don't care whether you've got a 4K ultra, I don't know, ultra great picture. They don't care about that. Like, people focus on the wrong things. That's the equivalent of trying to build a business by handing out your business cards, by not doing any client research, instead of just putting up a website, spending all your time on a website and then just waiting for the clients to come in rather than be proactive and actually approaching them.
Yeah, it reminds me of the money. I don't know what they're called. They're called money guns, where they shoot the money. The gurus. They like this.
I feel like that you should intro. I feel like you should intro each of your podcasts like that
with a money gun. Yeah,
with a money
gun. So making vague claims of expertise. So he goes in here and he says, okay, this guy is specifically talking about hiring people. He says, when I'm vetting potential hires, I looked at LinkedIn to get an idea of expertise and work history. All too often, I see vague, bombastic claims of technical expertise that aren't backed up by any evidence.
So, like it's a tough one. So I think here's what I think. I'll just be completely honest with what I think. I think they're both kind of right in a way, and people, the barrier to entry is so low now to get online. Anyone could be sharing content about anything, right? And I think sometimes people share, content, or they've created the profile around things, or they're sharing their thoughts on things which they know little about, right? And that doesn't help them move forward, either, but like the more specific that you can actually be, the better results you're going to get. But I do know as well, people have to start somewhere. They do have to start somewhere. So it's a bit of a tough one. So if you're starting from somewhere, you should really only be talking about things, writing on your profile things, creating content about things that you actually have an in-depth understanding about. So, I love like psychology and things like this. So I'll talk a lot about psychology and like, but I won't say like it's me who said this. I'll be like, well, this author said this, this psychology book said this. Did you know, Robert Cialdini said this, kind of like how I've done in the podcast right here, right? And I don't have a deeper understanding of these guys, but I know these guys do. So I'll just reference them instead. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. So we talked about endorsements, not showing who you really are.
Give me some context around that.
Yeah, okay. A lot of job, rather than copying and pasting from one, use this platform as an extension of your resume. Give potential employers an idea of who you really are beyond a set of skills. So maybe, like if this was on a CV, it would be the old interests section. Maybe a little bit about, clubs and...
Hire people, do business with people they like, I think you should be showing who you are. You should be potentially showing a little bit of your life as well. I know this is a business platform. A lot of people say, it's not Facebook and all this, but I do think like it's kind of important to discover a little bit of who we are. So, and the face behind, the profile picture, what they actually think as well. So I think that's kind of good.
Yeah. Okay. And you brought it up there, and some people say, this is not Facebook. This should not be here. And so, what's professional? What's unprofessional? Okay, so making it personal, we share stuff about like our home life and maybe like if people move from one country to another, the difficulties they had, or adapting to the culture or language. And then some people maybe they berate others for, sharing stuff. This should not be here. This should be on Facebook. This is not for this. What's your opinion on like what's for Facebook, what's for LinkedIn? Or
I think some people are kind of stuck in their old ways, right? They're stuck in their old ways around what they shouldn't have on there, because ultimately so I've seen this loads of times, right? I've seen where a person with a large following will share something that's actually a little bit inaccurate, but they'll have everyone agreeing with them anyway. And then a person with no following will share something that's accurate and they won't get anything, right? And basically people have a tendency to, like and agree with the people they find either entertaining or the people they, kind of resonate with a little bit more. So it's tough to say like what exactly to share and what not to share. It really comes down to your personality. But if you can find a way to maybe educate people whilst also being a little bit funny as well, maybe try and educate people while also being authentic. Not every story has to be a sob story, but if it makes sense to do it, and you aren't just hunting for likes, then sure, do it, right?
Okay. So, tell me a little bit more about what you offer. I know you've given such great information, and I think I'll listen to it again. I'm working out all my marketing message anyway with Leah Sparrow, who we've had on the podcast before. So I'm kind of going to be launching that in a little bit next few days. But for you, what you offer, I think you have some coaching sessions that you do some free coaching for people, and is that how? Yeah.
I have, it's probably not great for my marketing message, but I have my fingers in like many pies, right? I like to juggle quite a lot. What I mainly do is I help businesses with a LinkedIn sales and marketing strategy. That's what I mainly do. I'm working with more small to medium-sized businesses at the moment. Anybody who's not really on LinkedIn, who maybe at the moment I'm working with teams, right? So people who have a team underneath them who need some to bring me in to train them. In terms of like the free stuff I've got at the moment, I'm actually running a group because from what I've found, all my time in like the online space is the biggest thing which actually bottlenecks people and stops them from moving forward is they know what to do, they just don't do it. So I'm actually running, it's just like a passion sort of thing at the moment. I'm helping a few entrepreneurs. I'm just going to keep them accountable for 21 days to try and break through the blocks and get them moving. I'm not charging them anything for it. I just want to, help people get moving as well. Because I think like we block ourselves in life, right? But I feel like I wasn't very specific on what I do, but essentially just helping businesses with like.
No, I think you've kind of displayed that this evening. You've given us a good overview of your service, and you've been very generous with all your knowledge and experience. And I think for someone to listen to this podcast, they get a lot of value out of it. But if they decide to, take up this challenge or they want to contact you directly, of course, you're on LinkedIn, and I'm going to put your link in the show notes as well. What other ways are you on Instagram and Twitter and all these places? Or
I am. They're not very big at all at the moment. So if you want to learn more about me or even just get some free value, whether it's sales, whether it's productivity advice, whether it's psychology, how you can implement psychology into advice. My YouTube channel is the one where I do kind of long form speaking. A lot of people have got value out of it, and it's all free as well. So you can find that at youtube.com/Rob Lally. That's how you find me.
That's it. And so all the info will be in the show notes. And Rob, thanks again.
I appreciate it so much, Philip.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.